Hey guys, Tom Baker here from Chasing Cars, and just before we get started, many of you know, especially if you've been a subscriber for a while, that it isn't just me here on Chasing Cars. There's lots of talented people both behind and in front of the camera. Today, it's a first go for our new cadet journalist here at Chasing Cars, Mr. John Law, who I hope we'll be seeing more of in the future. His first assignment, a review of his very own Dakar Yellow E36 BMW 328i. Take it away, John.
I'm John Law, this is Chasing Cars, and today we have something a little bit different for you with this blast from the past in a 1997 BMW 3 Series. This is the E36 generation car, which was produced between 1991 and 1999, and it was the first car to use computers aiding in its design to come up with the more aerodynamic shape. That's led to it being sort of the ugly duckling of the 3 Series range. I don't think so. I think it's aged rather well. It looks pretty cool, especially in this striking Dakar yellow, but it's also sort of the genesis of everything in modern BMW. So it's got a sophisticated multi-link rear suspension system, which is basically what all the cars use today. It's also got, it's got a naturally aspirated straight six, which is a bit old school, but it does have a very driver-focused cockpit with a sort of generational beginning of iDrive, which I'll show you now. So, inside the E36, what's it like? Well, it's okay. The iDrive I was talking about earlier is found down here. It really just tells you your temperature, time, that's about it. So it's really the first generation. Moving up, you've got your climate control, dual zone. So I've got these two rather large vents, which is fantastic. 6-stacker CD player mounted in the boot, obligatory tape deck, and you've got this aftermarket steering wheel, which has been fitted as the original unit's very boat-like. It's huge, you can't really use the pedals. That brings us on to the driving position, which is a bit peculiar. So my pedals are sort of set 15 degrees to the right, the steering wheel's set sort of 10 degrees again to the left from the central place. So it feels a bit odd when you first get in. It is something you get used to though. What you don't get used to so much is the distance of the steering wheel. It really needs to be a little bit closer, and that's because it's only got sort of height adjustment. There's no reach adjustment, which is a bit of an oversight in my opinion. Otherwise, the seats are comfortable, leather in here, you've got a little bit of sort of fake wood grain around, dotted over the place, and you've got these lovely leather sort of armrests, which work really nicely. It's, apart from the slightly strange driving position, it's quite a pleasant place to spend a couple of hours. So yeah, the front's not bad. Now, the rear is a slightly different story, so I'll show you that now. So, to the rear seat. I'll start with the good. You do have a rather nice leather-covered rear armrest pull-out with cup holders, which is pretty good. The material back here is good. You've actually got weirdly more sort of soft touch and leather than you do in the front seat. I suppose that makes sense for the rear occupants. They're not so concerned with driving. What's not great though is the lack of creature comfort. So there's no 12-volt charging socket, there's no ventilation back here for aircon, there's just sort of a cigarette ashtray and pretty minimal knee room. Behind myself I've sort of got a tiny bit, but if I sort of sit right, the hard back quite digs into your knee. The headroom is a little compromised. I mean, I am 6'2" and there still is a little bit, but it's a little closer than I'd like. Because I have the seat at the lowest setting, there is zero toe room underneath me, which feels a little bit constricting. This is really a car designed with 2 occupants up the front in mind, maybe some kids in the back. It's not the greatest place to be for a long period of time, but you know, for 10-15 minute, sort of half an hour jaunts, it's not too bad back here. And now around to the boot of the E36. Now, it's got this really cool feature, which has got a sort of flip-down toolkit mounted in the top of the thing. This has got its full complement of tools, which is pretty rare to see in a car like this. I personally love the rear end of this car. I think it's the best part of it. It's got a really nice camtail profile. It's very sort of swish and looks aerodynamic. Would have looked pretty space age in 1992 when it came out, I'd imagine. Now, the boot itself is decently sized. If you want to go away for a weekend, you can fit enough suitcases in there to sort of get you and a couple of people away. Unfortunately, there's no folding seat option, so storing a bicycle or larger items is difficult to do. The coupe actually has a bigger boot for that reason. However, this one has about a 400 litre boot, which interestingly is very similar to the current generation of 2 Series coupe, with which it shares many other dimensions, such as the wheelbase and the overall length of the car. So really, the 2 Series is now the size that the 3 Series used to be, which is, it's interesting to see, and I think that shows in how this car drives. It drives a little less like the bigger G20 3 Series and a bit more like a sort of smaller, lither 2 Series. So let's find out how they drive out on the road. driving the E36. What's it like? Well, it's pretty good. It's definitely old school. It sort of crosses the boundaries between full old school that you'd find in an E30 and a modern car. So it doesn't have the sharpness of a modern car. It doesn't have that laser precision turn in. You have to sort of work the steering wheel and feel it weight up, but when you do, it really rewards, as does that straight six naturally aspirated engine. I keep coming back to it, but 2.5 litres, little bit of exhaust work on this car, and it just sounds fantastic. It's a sound you don't get anymore. It's yeah, it accompanies the whole car. And although the engine isn't that strong, 120 kilowatts, which is pretty low these days, especially from a 6, 260 newton meters, which isn't bad. It's all up there. So peak power is 5,600, and I believe peak torque's almost 4,000 RPM. So you have to work this engine to make it sing like it wants to. When you do, it's very pleasant. I mean, NVH we've got to talk about as well, because it's nothing like a modern car. Everything creaks and rattles. It is 22 years old, so you got to give it that. Lots of the glue will have kind of gone off, but yeah, South African build quality is perhaps not quite as good as the German built coupes as well. It's important to mention. But yeah, she's a bit noisy in here, and it does get a bit tiring at highway speeds. But when you're enjoying your back roads, it's not so bad. Aircon works. Everything else is pretty good. So yeah, it's a really enjoyable car to drive. And although it's not a modern 3 Series, you can definitely feel the DNA between the two. The gear shift though is a little notchy and a bit rubbery. It's very BMW. It's sort of, if they did a really good dual clutch in this car, which is obviously a ridiculous thing to say, I would probably pick that. But the way it goes through the gears is pleasant enough, and it's much better than the 4-speed auto you could otherwise get in this. Chassis balance, 50-50 weight distribution. BMW, it's so classic. It feels like a modern sort of lower gradient 2 Series. It feels that sort of slight understeer on turn-in, sort of builds to a neutrality, and then you can sort of do whatever you want with it on exit. You can get around that understeer by turning in like a madman, but driving at road speeds, it definitely has a little whiff of that. Just that safety communication thing. So yeah, it just feels like a very faithful chassis. It doesn't feel like it would do anything strange to you. Modern cars with so much ESP can sort of get away with having a stiffer rear axle that bounces about a bit to make a car feel a lot more athletic than perhaps it truly would be. If you turn the ESP off, they get a bit scrappy as you drive them harder. Whereas this, it feels like it steps up to the occasion. Other things that I like about this car are the control weights. They're so well matched. Everything's heavier. Everything is much heavier than a modern car. The throttle, the brake, the clutch, the steering, the gearbox, it all has a weight to it. But it adds to the feeling that this car is made properly. And that's what German cars were all about, is the build quality. It feels like it's from something almost stronger than steel in the way that the weights are. Obviously it's not, but it is, yeah, it's pleasant, and they're well matched, which is a big plus, because a lot of modern cars have a nice sort of lightweight pedal box, but then when you turn them into sport, the steering just gets so treacly and electronic, and it's just nice to have that connected feedback you get from a hydraulic system in this car, even though the rack is slow. But yeah, you work together with this car. That's how it feels on a twisty road. You and the car have to work together to get the best out of each other, which is, yeah, it's so different. You do have a traction control system as well, but it's pretty rudimentary. It sort of just works on the throttle body and restricts airflow, so it's very old school and it doesn't do very much. Interior quality, as I mentioned, isn't great, and on the move, stuff does start to rattle. That's because of the slightly harsher ride quality. The chassis stiffness is evident. It's less stiff than in a modern car. You can really feel it sort of flexing, and the suspension having to compensate for that. And yeah, it's not quite as amazing as a modern car, but as I said, the balance is there. That 50-50 weight distribution is there, and when you get it going on a road, it's a really enjoyable thing to drive. So, the E36, does it stack up to a modern car? In some ways, I would say yes. In a lot of ways, though, it is no. So we'll start with the no's. The interior quality is not what you'd get in a sort of similarly spec'd price today. Say a 330i, you would definitely not get that sort of interior quality. There's a lot more soft touch, much nicer leather to be found inside. Same with the infotainment. What car can you buy today with a tape deck? Nothing, obviously. But you sort of start to ignore that and think about the naturally aspirated straight six, which I keep rabbiting on about, but it's just a pleasant thing to be in. It's so smooth, it revs out beautifully, and it just has that noise, the induction noise and the exhaust noise that just sort of, I don't know, endear it to me. It's a really pleasant thing to drive. Nowhere near as fast as a modern car, 8.1 seconds 0 to 100. Not quick, but it feels like it's going faster than it is. Handling as well, it maintains the 50-50 weight distribution that BMW always harps on about, and you can really feel that in the drive. It's very balanced. It's a really enjoyable car to throw into a couple of corners, and you can kind of drive it however you want. You can drive it aggressively, you can drive it gently, you can drive it anywhere from extremely slow to extremely quickly. It really is an everyman's car. And I believe that's why in the 90s, this car sold so many units. And I also believe that's why you still see so many on the road today. So no, this isn't going to be better than a G23 series, but it's fun to have a drive and see how far we've come every now and again. Thanks for watching, as always. Don't forget to subscribe and click the bell icon so you never miss another full-length Australian video car review. Thanks for watching. Now, driving the E36, and